So, what if the entire age old debate between science and religion is actually built on a totally false premise? Today, we're going to dive into a pretty radical idea that connects something called rule based biology to what the source material calls the God problem. And it suggests the answer isn't in belief, but in a whole new kind of science.
We almost always frame this as a choice, right? You're in one camp or the other. But what if that's just the wrong way to look at it? What if the biggest, most profound question we can ask isn't actually about what you believe at all?
And this right here, this is what reframes the whole debate. The argument is that both of these classic positions, well, they lead to the same place, an intellectual dead end. Belief, on the one hand, kind of suspends the need to figure out how things really work. But rejection? That just kicks the can down the road. It gets rid of a label, but it doesn't solve the underlying puzzle of why things are the way they are.
All right, so if it's not about believing or rejecting, then what is it about? And that brings us to our first big idea, looking at this as a problem of explanation, pure and simple. For most of human history, the word God wasn't just some religious term. It was the placeholder for all the giant things we just couldn't wrap our heads around. The basic order of the universe, what makes things happen, the spark of life itself. In a way, the word was just an honest label for our own ignorance. And this right here is the key takeaway. Just throwing out the label God doesn't magically solve the mystery, right? It might feel like you're making intellectual progress, but the argument here is that it's just a rhetorical shortcut. It lets us sidestep the really hard work of figuring out the actual nuts and bolts mechanisms that run reality. Okay, so you might be thinking, why hasn't science just figured this all out by now? Well, that brings us to our second point, the idea that maybe our best and most fundamental tools have kind of hit a wall. Think about physics. It's our most fundamental science, right? It has given us absolutely incredible predictive power. But when it comes to explaining the basic nature of reality, what things are versus just what they do when we look at them, it's kind of stalled.
And this concept just nails the problem perfectly. Quantum mechanics is fantastic at telling you the odds of where a particle might be when you measure it, but it really struggles to describe what reality is like when no one's looking. It explains how we interact with the world, not the world itself. I mean, this is the kind of deep dilemma that drove even Einstein crazy.
So, where does this super abstract problem in physics suddenly become something you can't ignore? The argument is biology. Life itself, in all its messy, amazing complexity, forces these questions right out into the open, questions that physics has been able to kind of put off.
Okay, so let's dig into that. This brings us to our third section, where we're going to look at what's been called biology's missing foundation, the real reason it struggled to give us these deeper fundamental answers. Just look at the state of biology today as laid out here. We have these massive piles of data, but they don't really point to one single clear answer. We have tons and tons of models, but they tell us what happens, not why it has to be that way. Everything seems to depend on the specific context, not on some universal law. We're basically drowning in data, but we're starving for a unifying structure. And this really gets to the heart of it. Unlike physics, which is built on these ironclad laws like thermodynamics, biology has pretty much always been a descriptive science. It's been fantastic at cataloging what's happening, which gene turns on, which protein does what, but it hasn't given us the fundamental rulebook for why it all has to work that way. So how do we fix that? How do we get that rulebook? Well, that leads us right into section 4, this idea of a huge paradigm shift, moving away from just describing things to actually deriving them. Okay, so the key concept here is something called governing constraints. These aren't just patterns we observe, they're the fundamental, unbreakable rules of the game. Think about it like this. Gravity doesn't just describe that a ball falls, it constrains it. It makes it impossible for the ball to just float away. The idea is to find those same kinds of constraints for biology, the rules that create necessity. And this chart here just makes that shift super clear. On one side, you've got descriptive biology, what we mostly do now. It records what happens, it's based on correlation, and it's very context dependent. On the other side, you have this new idea, foundational biology. This is all about explaining why things must happen that way. It's based on hard rules and derivation, and it's internally consistent no matter the context. And if you can actually do this, wow, the implications are just enormous. When you ground biology in a set of rules, you can start deriving how biological mechanisms work instead of just inferring them. All those weird contradictions in the data, they start to melt away. Real, robust prediction becomes possible. And all that mind-boggling complexity of life, it suddenly has a structure. You can finally truly make sense of it.
All right, so this is a really powerful new way to think about biology. But how does this all circle back to that huge question we started with? Let's get into our final section, explaining the unexplained.
And here it is. This is the big payoff. If you can actually figure out the governing constraints for life, you're not just doing biology anymore. You're turning life itself into a test bed, a proving ground for the fundamental rules of reality, the very rules that have been just out of physics' reach.
So this is the process, the transformation that takes place. Step 1, you replace belief with necessity, because the rules tell you what has to happen. Step 2, you replace mystery with structure. You get a real framework. And step 3, you replace authority with derivation. Anyone can take the rules and work out the answer for themselves. It's not about who says it. It's about what the rules dictate. And this is where this whole line of thinking lands. That ancient placeholder we talked about, God, it completely transforms. It's no longer something you believe in or don't believe in. It becomes a principle. The ultimate symbol of mystery becomes a solvable, derivable set of rules that govern existence. A puzzle we can actually work on.
So what we're looking at here is a total reframing of one of the oldest questions humanity has ever asked. And it's not being approached through philosophy or faith, but through a new, more rigorous, foundational science. It really leaves you with a mind-bending thought, doesn't it? Is biology, the science of life itself, about to answer the one question that physics, the science of matter, never could?